This is Jackanory Jr. Hello, I'm Adrian. This story is about dragons, good ones and bad ones. It's also about a little boy who wanted to save the world. It's called The Snow Dragon. In the beginning was a world, and it was divided into two halves. The southern half was burning hot and ruled by ferocious fire dragons, but in the cold and icy north lived the peace-loving snow dragons. Where north and south came together, there was a long, narrow land of water and green hills where tall trees and leafy plants grew. And in this land lived the Two Legs. The Two Legs pottered about happily for many years, tending the earth and growing fruit and flowers. And the dragons took no notice of them. But then came a happening that changed everything. At the time of the making of the world, a book was written. A book so special that it was always known simply as Book. Book was a handbook of instructions on how the world worked, and the dragons found it very useful. The happening began when the most royal of fire dragons himself called for Book.
Book,
He rumbled.
tell me if one day I will be lord of all the world, south and north, together.
Book sniggered.
Read and see the future.
And it opened its pages wide.
Behold, the time is coming when fire dragons will be no more.
The fire dragon stared and stared again.
How can this be true?
He snarled.
Who could ever defeat me?
Book turned another page.
A two-leg,
Sneered Book.
The fire dragons will be defeated by a two-leg.
The most royal of fire dragons roared such a terrible blast of flame that the skies turned to burning crimson, and he hurled Book away into the darkness of the swirling smoke and ashes. From that moment on, life became a misery for all Two Legs. The fire dragons hunted them down and blackened their plants and scorched the earth around them. The Two Legs took to living underground in dark caves and dusty, scratched-out tunnels. As time went on, the fire dragons flew further and further north, spreading heat and dryness. The peace-loving snow dragons were driven further and further back, behind huge mountains of snow and ice, until it was thought that there were no snow dragons left alive. But then came a second happening. There were many orphans among the Two Legs. One such orphan was Little Tuft. He lived with the very oldest Two Leg, who told him wonderful stories about life as it had been before the happening. Stories of the shining sun and green plants and the rush and splash of the streams and rivers. His favorite story was of the magical snow dragons who loved peace and who never went to war. "Why can't we go and find one?" Little Tuft asked. But the oldest Two Leg only smiled and nodded. Little Tuft stopped asking questions, but as soon as he grew tall enough to open the huge wooden door that protected the Two Legs from the world outside, he crept out. He wanted to see for himself what was going on. Outside the caves, Little Tuft stared all around. The earth was charred and burnt and blackened. He took a deep breath and began to walk. Somewhere there was a way to bring back the magic green land that the oldest Two Legs told such wonderful stories about. There had to be a way, and he Little Tuft was going to find it, even if... Little Tuft found himself slipping and sliding down a deep, dark chasm. He landed at the bottom.
Excuse me, said a rusty, dusty voice, but would you mind not treading all over me with your grubby little feet?
Little Tuft had found Book. Little Tuft scrabbled and struggled and heaved and hauled himself and Book back up to the sunlight. There he sat down to rest, and Book slyly fluttered his pages open. Little Tuft gasped. "I can see a snow dragon," he whispered, and he rubbed his eyes. "It almost looks as if it's alive."
Ahem, said Book. Pay attention. This is the most royal snow dragon asleep in her ice palace.
"But is it true? Is she alive?" asked Little Tuft, breathless in his excitement. "Then we must find her." So Little Tuft set off to find the snow dragon. Book went with him. As they travelled further and further north, they saw fewer and fewer fire dragons until one day they saw none at all. At last they began to trudge across snow and ice, and the air was full of frost and silver flakes. The gates to the ice palace were encrusted with icicles, but Little Tuft was small enough to slide between the bars. The most royal of snow dragons was asleep.